September 17, 1805. Fermoy Barracks, County Cork, Ireland. At dawn, a military surgeon named Thomas Halliwell stands over two bodies in the morning mist. Both men are officers of the 63rd Regiment of Foot. Both are dead. One has a musket ball lodged in his chest cavity. The other has bled out from a wound to his abdomen. Between them, tethered to a wooden post, stands a regimental goat, the 63rd's mascot, its eyes wide, its coat splattered with blood. The goat had witnessed everything. What appeared to be a routine matter of honor between two British officers would unravel into something far more complex. Because the woman they died for, an Irishwoman named Siobhan O'Malley, was not merely the object of their affection. She was a symbol of something much larger, much darker, and far more politically dangerous than anyone in the regiment could have imagined. But the truth was far more terrifying than a simple duel over a woman's favor. Before we uncover the truth about the Fermoy Barracks regimental goat and the illegal duel that left two officers dead over an Irish woman's honor, make sure to subscribe to The Silent Abbey and ring that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's darkest corners. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now let's step back to the autumn of 1805, when Ireland was a powder keg waiting to explode. The year 1805 marks a crucial moment in Irish-British relations. Just 5 years earlier, the Act of Union had abolished the Irish Parliament, forcing Ireland into a political marriage with Great Britain that most Irish Catholics violently opposed. The wound was still fresh, the resentment still burning. Fermoy, a garrison town in County Cork, existed primarily to serve the military. The barracks dominated the landscape, a sprawling complex of stone buildings, drill yards, and officer quarters that housed rotating regiments, tasked with maintaining order in a restive countryside. The 63rd Regiment of Foot, known as the West Suffolk Regiment, had been stationed there since March of that year, part of the British strategy to maintain a military presence throughout Ireland in case Napoleon's forces attempted an invasion through the Irish coast. The relationship between the British soldiers and the Irish townspeople was complicated. On the surface, there was commerce. The soldiers needed food, drink, and entertainment, and Fermoy's merchants needed their coin. Beneath this transactional civility lay generations of colonial oppression, religious persecution, and cultural erasure that no amount of British sterling could erase. Captain James Thornbury was 28 years old, the third son of a wealthy Suffolk landowner. He had purchased his commission at age 20, and had served with distinction in the West Indies before his posting to Ireland. His letters home, preserved in the Suffolk Record Office, describe Ireland as a green and pleasant land cursed with an ungrateful and superstitious population. He was, by all accounts, a typical representative of the Anglo-Irish military establishment, confident in British superiority, dismissive of Irish culture, and entirely certain of his right to command. Lieutenant Edward Fitzwilliam was a different sort of officer. At 23, he was the son of a minor Irish Protestant family that had been in Ireland for 3 generations. His family owned land in County Tipperary, and unlike Thornbury, Fitzwilliam spoke Irish Gaelic. He understood the complex web of loyalties and resentments that defined Irish society in ways that most British-born officers never could. His regimental file, housed in the National Archives at Kew, notes that he was perhaps too familiar with the native Irish population for an officer of His Majesty's forces. The regimental goat, a tradition in British military units, was more than a mascot. These animals were treated with ceremonial importance, often given ranks and accorded privileges that reflected the regiment's pride and identity. The 63rd's goat, a large male named Fergus, a sly nod to Irish nomenclature that Fitzwilliam had championed, had been with the regiment for 3 years. It attended parades, was present at formal occasions, and had become a familiar sight in Fermoy, often tethered outside the officers' mess. What no one in the regiment understood was that Fergus would become the only witness to an event that would expose the fault lines running through both the British military establishment and Irish society itself. Something was building in Fermoy that autumn, something that would turn a matter of personal honor into a political catastrophe. The first incident occurred on August 23, 1805, at the Golden Lion Tavern on Fermoy's Main Street. According to the deposition of Patrick Mahoney, the tavern keeper, Captain Thornbury had entered his establishment around 8 in the evening, already intoxicated. With him were 3 other British officers. They demanded the best room and the finest whiskey. which Mahoney provided without objection. What drew attention was Thornbury's treatment of Mahoney's serving girl, Siobhan O'Malley. Siobhan was 20 years old, the daughter of a hedge schoolmaster who had died during the 1798 rebellion. She had been educated far beyond what was typical for a woman of her station. She could read and write in both English and Irish, and possessed what contemporaries described as an unusual degree of intelligence and independence of spirit. She worked at the Golden Lion to support her widowed mother and 2 younger siblings. Mahoney's deposition, preserved in the Cork County Archive, states, Captain Thornbury made improper advances toward Miss O'Malley, grasping her wrist when she attempted to serve him and making declarations of his desire for her company in a manner that caused visible distress. Lieutenant Fitzwilliam, who had entered the tavern separately, intervened and requested that Captain Thornbury release the young woman and show proper decorum. The confrontation was brief but intense. Thornbury, according to 3 separate witnesses, accused Fitzwilliam of forgetting his place and his race, a clear reference to Fitzwilliam's Irish Protestant background. Fitzwilliam responded that he had forgotten nothing except perhaps the manners that gentlemen were supposed to possess. The 2 officers left separately, and the incident seemed to end there. But it didn't end, not even close. The second incident occurred just 1 week later, on August 30th, during a regimental inspection. Colonel Marcus Wyndham, the commanding officer of the 63rd, was reviewing the troops when he noticed tension between Thornbury and Fitzwilliam during the formal proceedings. According to the testimony of Sergeant Major Robert Clayton, the 2 officers could barely stand in proximity without visible signs of hostility. When Colonel Wyndham inquired privately about the cause, Thornbury claimed that Fitzwilliam had been spreading seditious and disloyal opinions among the men, specifically regarding Irish grievances against British rule. This was a serious accusation in 1805. The memory of the 1798 rebellion, when Irish Republicans, inspired by French revolutionary ideals, had risen up against British rule, was still painfully fresh. Thousands had died, and the British military remained paranoid about any hint of Irish nationalism within the ranks, particularly from Protestant Irish officers whose loyalty might be divided. Fitzwilliam, when confronted, denied spreading sedition, but admitted he had spoken with some of the Irish-born soldiers about their families and the conditions in their home counties. He further stated that he had criticized Thornbury's behavior toward a respectable young woman of the town, and that Thornbury's anger was rooted in embarrassment rather than patriotism. Colonel Wyndham, a career soldier, who had no patience for personal disputes interfering with military discipline, ordered both men to apologize to each other and drop the matter. They did so formally, in his presence. But the resentment festered. The third incident brought Siobhan O'Malley back into the picture. On September 9th, Lieutenant Fitzwilliam was seen walking with Siobhan along the River Blackwater that ran through Fermoy. Multiple witnesses, both British soldiers and Irish townspeople, noted that the 2 appeared to be in deep conversation, and that their manner suggested more than casual acquaintance. Mary Brennan, a washerwoman who saw them together, later testified that Miss O'Malley seemed most comfortable in the lieutenant's company, and he in hers, as if they had found understanding between them. In the rigid social hierarchy of 1805 Ireland, this was explosive. A British officer walking openly with an Irish Catholic woman, particularly one who worked as a serving girl, violated numerous unwritten rules. It suggested not merely romantic interest, but a rejection of the social barriers that maintained British authority. When word reached Captain Thornbury, and reach him it did, within hours, his reaction was volcanic. According to Lieutenant Charles Pemberton, who shared quarters with Thornbury, the captain spent the evening of September 9th drinking heavily and raging about traitors to their class and country, who cavort with Irish rebels in skirts. The following morning, September 10th, Thornbury confronted Fitzwilliam directly outside the officers' mess. What was said between them remains partially unclear, but Sergeant Major Clayton, who was within earshot, reported hearing Thornbury call Fitzwilliam a disgrace to His Majesty's uniform, and something much worse, a papist sympathizer who would bet an Irish whore to prove his loyalty to the wrong flag. Fitzwilliam's response was immediate and physical. He struck Thornbury across the face with his glove. In the Military Honor Code of 1805, this meant only one thing: a challenge to a duel had been issued and accepted. The fourth and final escalating incident occurred that same evening, when Colonel Wyndham learned of the challenge. Dueling was technically illegal under both British military regulations and Irish civil law, but it persisted as a method of resolving disputes among officers. Colonel Wyndham summoned both men to his quarters and attempted to mediate. According to his own report, later submitted to Horse Guards in London, I endeavored to make both officers see reason, but Captain Thornbury insisted that his honor had been impugned beyond repair, and Lieutenant Fitzwilliam, while expressing regret for the situation, stated he would not apologize for defending the character of an innocent woman, or for striking a man who had slandered her. Wyndham found himself in an impossible position. If he allowed the duel, he was permitting an illegal act that could result in the death of one or both officers. If he prevented it by force, placing them under arrest, he risked destroying morale and suggesting that British officers lacked honor. He made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. He confined both men to barracks, but did not place them under guard, essentially allowing them to proceed while maintaining official deniability. What authorities would discover just 7 days later would reveal that this was about far more than 2 officers and 1 woman. It was about empire, occupation, and the violence required to maintain both. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button and help us share these forgotten chapters of history with more people. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries and historical deep dives. Let's discover what happens next on that misty September morning in 1805. September 17, 1805. Dawn breaks over Fermoy Barracks at approximately 5:47 a.m. Private John Hoskins, on routine patrol of the eastern perimeter of the barrack, KS grounds, notices something unusual near the old practice range, a section of field used for musket training but largely abandoned due to its distance from the main compound. He sees 2 figures lying motionless in the grass. Between them, tethered to a post, stands Fergus, the regimental goat. Hoskins approaches cautiously. What he sees stops him in his tracks. 2 men in officers' uniforms lie approximately 30 paces apart, the traditional distance for a formal duel. Both are clearly dead. One, Captain James Thornbury, lies on his back, his arms spread wide, his uniform jacket soaked with blood from a wound in his chest. The other, Lieutenant Edward Fitzwilliam, has fallen forward, his face turned to the side, blood pooled beneath him from an abdominal wound. Between them lie 2 discharged dueling pistols, expensive pieces with ivory grips that Hoskins recognizes as belonging to the regimental armory. Hoskins runs for help. Within minutes, Sergeant Major Clayton arrives, followed quickly by the regimental surgeon, Thomas Hallowell. What Hallowell discovers during his initial examination, documented in his medical report dated September 17, 1805, provides crucial evidence of what occurred. Captain Thornbury sustained a single gunshot wound to the left anterior chest, approximately 4 inches below the clavicle and 2 inches lateral to the sternum. Hallowell writes in his characteristic clinical prose, "The trajectory of the ball suggests it was fired from a position directly in front of the deceased, traveling at a slightly upward angle, consistent with a shot fired from approximately 30 yards distance. The ball penetrated the left lung and lodged near the spine. Death would have occurred within 2 to 3 minutes as the lung filled with blood. Thornbury had drowned in his own blood, conscious and aware as his life drained away. Fitzwilliam's wound was equally fatal but differently positioned. Lieutenant Fitzwilliam sustained a gunshot wound to the upper right quadrant of the abdomen, the ball entering approximately 3 inches to the right of the umbilicus and traveling posteriorly. The wound track suggests perforation of the liver and possibly the inferior vena cava. Death would have resulted from rapid exsanguination, likely within 4 to 5 minutes. But Hallowell's report contains additional observations that immediately strike him as unusual. Both men's pistols show evidence of recent discharge. However, powder burns on Captain Thornbury's hand and uniform are minimal, while Lieutenant Fitzwilliam's right hand shows more significant burning and residue. Additionally, Fitzwilliam's pistol was found approximately 6 feet from his body, as if it had been dropped or thrown, while Thornbury's lay beside his right hand. More disturbing is what Hallowell finds when he examines the scene more carefully. There are 3 sets of footprints in the morning dew, 2 sets in officers' boots, and 1 set in working-class shoes, suggesting a third person was present. The footprints lead to and from a small copse of trees approximately 50 yards from where the bodies lie. Colonel Wyndham arrives at 6:15 a.m. His face, according to Sergeant Major Clayton's later testimony, became as white as chalk when he sees the scene. He immediately orders the area sealed and demands a full accounting of who knew about the duel. This is when they discover the additional evidence that transforms this from a tragic but straightforward illegal duel into something far more complicated. Fergus, the regimental goat, is still tethered to his post, unusually agitated. When Private Hoskins attempts to lead him away, the animal resists, pulling toward a specific spot near the tree line. Following the goat's insistent behavior, Hoskins discovers a leather satchel hidden beneath fallen leaves. Inside the satchel are documents that make Colonel Wyndham's blood run cold. The first item is a letter, written in Irish Gaelic, addressed to T. E. officers and men of conscience within the British occupation forces. It calls for resistance against British rule, specifically mentioning the Act of Union as an illegal imposition on Irish sovereignty. It's signed with a pseudonym, Gron O'Malley, the Irish name for the legendary 16th-century pirate Queen Grace O'Malley. The second item is a list of names, British officers stationed throughout County Cork, including both Captain Thornbury and Lieutenant Fitzwilliam, along with notes in Irish about their movements, habits, and weaknesses. It's an intelligence document, the kind that would be invaluable to Irish rebels planning actions against British forces. The third item is a personal letter from Lieutenant Fitzwilliam to Siobhan O'Malley, dated September 14th, 3 days before the duel. In it, Fitzwilliam expresses his love for her but also his conflicted feelings about his role as a British officer in Ireland. "I am torn between the loyalty I owe my commission and the loyalty I owe to justice," he writes. "You have shown me truths I was raised to ignore, and I cannot unsee them now." Colonel Wyndham stands in the morning mist, holding documents that suggest the woman at the center of this tragedy might have been more than a serving girl caught between two rivals. She might have been an Irish rebel, using romance and politics to manipulate British officers. Or, more terrifyingly, Fitzwilliam might have been genuinely converted to the Irish cause. And this duel might have been engineered as something other than a simple matter of honor. The regimental goat Fergus had witnessed everything. But goats cannot testify. And the only two people who knew what really happened on that field were now dead. What authorities discovered next would expose a conspiracy that reached far beyond Fermoy Barracks. The investigation into the deaths of Captain Thornbury and Lieutenant Fitzwilliam began within hours of the discovery and immediately fractured along multiple lines of inquiry, each more troubling than the last. Colonel Wyndham faced an immediate decision: report the incident as a straightforward illegal duel or investigate the possibility of Irish rebel involvement. He chose both, a decision that would create parallel investigations with very different agendas. The military inquiry focused on establishing the facts of the duel itself. Lieutenant Charles Pemberton, under direct questioning, admitted that he had served as Thornbury's second. He testified that the duel had been arranged for dawn on September 17th, at the abandoned practice range, with all proper formalities observed. He had inspected both pistols, loaded them himself, and administered the traditional protocols. But Pemberton's testimony contained a crucial detail. There was supposed to be a second for Lieutenant Fitzwilliam as well. That second was Lieutenant Michael O'Brien, another Irish Protestant officer in the regiment. However, O'Brien had not appeared at the appointed time. Fitzwilliam had proceeded with the duel anyway, with only Pemberton present as witness to both men. When military police went to question Lieutenant O'Brien on the morning of September 17th, they discovered his quarters empty. O'Brien had not been seen since the evening of September 16th. His personal effects remained in his room, but his horse was missing from the regimental stables. He had vanished. This disappearance immediately elevated the investigation. O'Brien's absence suggested either guilt or fear, possibly both. Had he engineered something more sinister than a simple duel? Had he been involved with the same rebel conspiracy suggested by the documents found in the hidden satchel? The civilian investigation, conducted by Magistrate Sir Henry Blackwood, focused on Siobhan O'Malley. She was brought in for questioning on September 18th, and her testimony, preserved in the Cork Assizes records, reveals the complexity of the situation. Siobhan admitted she had spent time with Lieutenant Fitzwilliam and that they had developed feelings for each other. "He treated me with respect and genuine interest," he testified. "He asked about my father, about Irish history, about the suffering that followed the Rising. He listened as if my words mattered, which no British officer had ever done before. But she vehemently denied being involved in any rebel conspiracy. I am not a United Irishman," she stated, using the name of the rebel organization that had led the 1798 rebellion. "I am simply an Irishwoman trying to survive in a country occupied by foreign soldiers." If Lieutenant Fitzwilliam's conscience was troubled by his role in that occupation, that came from his own observations, not my manipulation. Regarding Captain Thornbury, her testimony was equally direct. "Captain Thornbury made unwanted advances. When I rejected him, he became angry. He saw me as property to be taken, not as a person with agency. Lieutenant Fitzwilliam defended me, and Captain Thornbury could not tolerate that defense because it challenged both his authority and his assumptions about Irish women." The documents found in the satchel posed the biggest mystery. When confronted with a letter in Irish Gaelic signed Grain Mahal, Siobhan's face, according to Sir Henry's notes, showed surprise but not guilt. The handwriting was examined by experts. It was not Siobhan's handwriting. In fact, the handwriting was identified as masculine. possibly educated at Trinity College Dublin based on certain letter formations common to that institution's style of instruction. This suggested the letter had been written by Lieutenant Fitzwilliam himself. Further investigation revealed that Fitzwilliam had been studying Irish language and history intensively during his posting to Fermoy. His personal library, confiscated after his death, contained numerous books on Irish antiquities, Irish poetry and translation, and political pamphlets arguing for Catholic emancipation and Irish self-governance. These were not illegal materials, but they suggested a man whose political sympathies were evolving in dangerous directions. The list of British officers found in the satchel presented another problem. The handwriting was different from the letter. This was Siobhan's handwriting, identified by multiple witnesses familiar with her literacy. When confronted with this evidence, she admitted she had been keeping notes about British officers, but claimed it was for personal safety, not rebel intelligence. "I needed to know which officers might pose a threat to me or other Irish women in the town," she explained. Captain Thornbury was not the only British officer who believed Irish women existed for his pleasure. "I kept notes on their habits so I could avoid being alone with the dangerous ones." This explanation was plausible but convenient. Sir Henry Blackwood remained skeptical but lacked evidence to charge her with sedition or treason. Without Lieutenant O'Brien or any concrete connection to known rebel organizations, the case against her collapsed. The Military Court of Inquiry, convened on October 3, 1805, reached its official conclusions. Captain James Thornbury and Lieutenant Edward Fitzwilliam had engaged in an illegal duel over a personal dispute involving a local woman. Both men had violated military regulations. Both had died as a result. Lieutenant Charles Pemberton received a reprimand for his role as second but was not otherwise punished. Lieutenant Michael O'Brien was declared a deserter, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. But the confidential appendix to the report, marked secret and sent directly to Horse Guards in London, told a different story. Colonel Wyndham warned his superiors that the Irish population was increasingly resistant to British rule, that Catholic emancipation sentiments were growing even among Protestant Irish, and that officers of Irish birth might prove unreliable in the event of renewed rebellion. He recommended at future postings to Ireland, prioritize English-born officers with no Irish connections. The political investigation conducted by Dublin Castle, the centre of British administration in Ireland, reached darker conclusions. Internal correspondence from Under-Secretary William Wickham, preserved in the National Archives, shows that British intelligence suspected a broader conspiracy to subvert officer loyalty through romantic entanglement with Irish women. Similar cases were reported from other garrisons, British officers developing sympathies for Irish causes after relationships with Irish women. Whether these were genuine love affairs that complicated political loyalties or deliberate rebel tactics remained unclear. What was clear was that the British administration saw Irish women as potential threats to military discipline. Siobhan O'Malley was never charged with any crime, but her life became impossible in Fermoy. British officers avoided the Golden Lion Tavern, which lost the military business that had sustained it. Patrick Mahoney was forced to dismiss her. According to parish records from St. Patrick's Church in Fermoy, Siobhan left the town in November 1805 with her mother and siblings. No further records exist of where they went. Lieutenant Michael O'Brien was never found. His name appears on lists of suspected United Irishmen compiled by British intelligence, but there is no evidence he ever participated in rebel activities after his disappearance. One unconfirmed report places him in America by 1807, but this remains speculative. He simply vanished into history. The regimental goat, Fergus, remained with the 63rd Regiment until his death in 1808. His presence at the duel became regimental legend, whispered about by soldiers but never officially acknowledged. When he died, he was buried with full military honors, a rare tribute that suggested the regiment's complex feelings about what he had witnessed. The most disturbing aftermath came from an unexpected source, a letter sent anonymously to Colonel Wyndham 3 months after the duel, in December 1805. Written in educated English but with Irish idioms, the letter claimed to be from someone who had known both Thornbury and Fitzwilliam. It stated, "The duel you investigated was not what it appeared. Lieutenant Fitzwilliam went to that field knowing he would die. He had decided he could no longer serve the British occupation with a clear conscience, but neither could he desert his commission without bringing shame to his family. He arranged his own honorable death. Captain Thornbury was the instrument, not the cause." The letter was never authenticated, and Wyndham marked it as the ramblings of an Irish malcontent seeking to sow discord. But the letter's claim raises a possibility never fully investigated, that Edward Fitzwilliam had, in essence, committed suicide by duel, using Thornbury's anger and wounded pride as the mechanism. If true, it would mean that the duel witnessed by a regimental goat on September 17, 1805, was not really about two men fighting over a woman's honor. It was about one man choosing death over complicity in a system he had come to see as unjust, and another man being manipulated into becoming an executioner. The truth died with both men on that misty field. But the consequences rippled far beyond Fermoy. The deaths of Captain Thornbury and Lieutenant Fitzwilliam represent a crystallizing moment in the long, violent history of British-Irish relations. What happened at Fermoy Barracks in 1805 exposed tensions that would define Ireland for the next century. The most immediate impact was on military policy. Following Colonel Wyndham's confidential report, the British Army implemented new regulations regarding officers of Irish Protestant descent serving in Ireland. While not an outright ban, the regulations made it significantly more difficult for Irish-born officers to receive postings in their home country. This policy, justified as a secu ridi measure, effectively declared that Irish Protestant officers, even those from loyal families who had served the crown for generations, were not fully trustworthy. This alienated precisely the class of people Britain needed to maintain control in Ireland, Protestant Irish who identified with British interests while understanding Irish culture and sentiment. By treating them with suspicion, British authorities pushed some toward more nationalist positions. The paranoia that followed the Fermoy incident contributed to the erosion of the Protestant ascendancy's unity, which would have profound consequences as the 19th century progressed. The incident also influenced British military attitudes toward dueling. While dueling remained technically illegal, military authorities had often turned a blind eye to the practice as a means of resolving officer disputes without involving formal military justice. The Fermoy case demonstrated the dangers of this tolerance. In 1806, the Army issued strengthened anti-dueling regulations with more severe penalties. While dueling persisted well into the 1840s, the era of tacitly accepted duels between officers began to decline after 1805. More broadly, the case highlighted the role of Irish women in the conflict between Ireland and Britain. British authorities became increasingly paranoid about Irish women as potential agents of subversion. This led to heightened surveillance and harsher treatment of Irish women who associated with British soldiers or officials. Relationships between British men and Irish women, already complicated by class, religion, and nationality, became sites of political suspicion. Siobhan O'Malley's fate, forced from her home, her reputation destroyed, her family displaced, became a common pattern. Irish women who attracted the attention of British officers, whether welcome or not, often found themselves caught between impossible choices: accept advances from men representing an occupying force, or refuse them and face economic and social consequences. The Fermoy case made this dynamic visible in ways that made British authorities uncomfortable, which is likely why the case was never widely publicized at the time. The incident also reveals something profound about the psychology of occupation and collaboration. Lieutenant Edward Fitzwilliam represents a recurring historical figure, the occupier who comes to identify with the occupied, whose conscience cannot sustain the contradiction between his official role and his moral perceptions. Whether Fitzwilliam genuinely converted to supporting Irish independence or simply developed human sympathy for Irish suffering, his internal conflict proved fatal. This pattern would repeat throughout British colonial history. Officers and administrators who, through direct contact with colonized peoples, began questioning the moral legitimacy of empire. Some, like Fitzwilliam, were destroyed by this contradiction. Others became advocates for reform or independence. Still others found ways to compartmentalize their doubts and continue serving. But the Fermoy case demonstrated that empire required not just military force but psychological suppression of empathy and moral questioning. Similar cases emerged from other Irish garrisons in the years following 1805. In 1807, 2 officers in Kilkenny fought a duel over a local woman. Both survived but were cashiered out of service. In 1809, a British captain in Belfast was discovered maintaining correspondence with Irish Catholic clergy about political reform. He was quietly transferred to India. In 1812, another officer in Galway was accused of excessive familiarity with Irish nationalist sentiments. He resigned his commission under pressure. These incidents were never officially connected to the Fermoy case, but the pattern is unmistakable. The British military, having occupied Ireland for centuries, found that occupation came with a cost, the constant possibility that occupiers might develop sympathies that undermined their effectiveness as instruments of control. The Catholic Emancipation Act of 1829, which finally allowed Catholics to sit in Parliament and hold most public offices, came partly in response to the growing recognition that Britain could not indefinitely maintain control over Ireland through military force and Protestant exclusivity. While the act was primarily driven by larger political forces, cases like Fermoy contributed to the understanding that the rigid exclusion of Catholics from power was creating instability even within Britain's own military and administrative apparatus. The regimental goat, Fergus, became an unintended symbol. In military folklore, the story of the goat who witnessed the fatal duel was sometimes told as a cautionary tale about honor and discipline. In Irish oral tradition passed down through generations in County Cork, the story was told differently, as a tale of an Irish woman who opened an Englishman's eyes to the truth of occupation, and who paid the price for that dangerous education. The question of whether Siobhan O'Malley was a rebel agent, or simply a woman caught in circumstances beyond her control, remains unresolved. Perhaps the truth is that she was both, or neither. Perhaps the question itself reveals the trap that British occupation created. Any Irish person who asserted their dignity and rights was, by definition, subversive to a system that required their submission. What happened at Fermoy Barracks in September 1805 was simultaneously intensely personal and deeply political. Two men died over a woman, over honor, over politics, over conscience. An Irish woman lost her home and livelihood for the crime of being desired and for possibly teaching uncomfortable truths. A regimental goat witnessed it all, silent and uncomprehending, but present at a moment when the contradictions of empire manifested in blood on the grass. The incident demonstrates that historical horror is not always about monsters and victims clearly defined. Sometimes the horror lies in systems that make decent people complicit in injustice, that transform love into treason, and that ensure that conscience becomes a fatal liability. The real terror is not the violence itself, but the structural inevitability of that violence in a society built on occupation and oppression. Lieutenant Fitzwilliam and Captain Thornbury both died serving the British Empire in Ireland, but they died for vastly different reasons, believing vastly different things, with vastly different degrees of choice in their fates. Their deaths, witnessed by a goat in the morning mist, reveal the complexity of human motivation and the tragedy of political conflict that forces impossible choices. The Fermoy duel was not an aberration, it was empire functioning exactly as empire functions, creating situations where honor requires violence, where love becomes treason, and where the only witness to truth is an animal that cannot speak. What do you think really happened on that field in September 1805? Was Lieutenant Fitzwilliam genuinely converted to the Irish cause by his relationship with Siobhan O'Malley, or was he manipulated by a skilled rebel agent? Did he choose death over continued service to an empire he'd come to question, or was it simply a tragic duel gone wrong? Was Siobhan an innocent victim caught between two men's egos, or was she something more calculated and dangerous? Leave your theories in the comments below. Tell us what you think drove these individuals to such a fatal confrontation. If you found this deep dive into a forgotten corner of Irish military history compelling, subscribe to The Silent Abbey for more lost chapters of history that reveal uncomfortable truths about empire, power, and human nature. And remember, history isn't just about what happened, it's about why it happened, and what it reveals about the systems we build and the choices we make within them. See you in the next video, where we'll uncover Ano, their dark mystery from history's shadows.